success. This is so great. So the next 50 minutes ish will be about how to do proper analysis, how to do how do we find deficits in gameplay, and also a little bit about the method of appealing to an individual and what actually constitutes a good player. You can be the best coach in the world, but if you cannot find out what the actual issue with a specific person is, it's going to be troublesome for you to actually be as efficient of a coach as you would like to be. In addition to this, I am a strong believer of the mathematical method, meaning I believe that you not only have to be able to observe an issue or observe a problem, you have to also be able to mathematically prove that it is there. This is because if you cannot prove it mathematically, it's not really a factor set. League of Legends has room for interpretation, there's room for different gameplay styles, but a lot of League of Legends boils down to the numbers, Did he deal more damage? Yes or no. Did he get more gold than he should have? Yes or no. Etc, etc, etc. If you cannot prove that what you're working on will lead to some sort of mathematical increase somewhere, then I don't think you'll ever be able to unlock your true potential as a coach. This goes for League of Legends coaching as well as most sports coaching. I also want to take this opportunity to encourage good work ethic, encourage some good habits. Oh, yeah, right, okay, perfect. I want to take this opportunity to make sure that you guys, if you're beginners, begin coaching from the right mindset, and instead of having to rewire your way of doing things so that you can hop in and straight off be effective, instead of having to dedicate hours and hours and hours to maybe teaching the wrong kind of thing. Okay, so this is going to be a little on the boring side, but this is necessary, I feel, and this is one of the things that you will be loved for doing. And it's kind of on this way that the little details make all the difference. You can send a postcard or you can send a handwritten postcard, right? And it's the little things that really add up and make the big thing here. So how do you perform like this? I have written down some basic rules here, and I've written up a model that allows you to see how do I actually do analysis. If you can do this model, if you can follow this model, you are now an analyst. Congratulations. Whether or not you're a good analyst is a completely different thing, but you are an analyst, okay? An analyst is one who can figure out patterns and work around the mathematical formula and mathematical side of things. Optimizing the amount of time spent in a jungle route, for example, is not necessarily a coaching thing. It's an analyst thing, because it's less to do with the individual and more to do with the ultimates, right? It's more to do with the facts of the game, so to speak. It works in the principles instead of the individuals, right? It's like saying math between psychology, right? Whereas the coaching is more on the psychology side and math is more on the analyst side. Whenever you have an issue, whenever you identify an issue, up here in the realization bit, I just switched slides really quickly. Whenever you find this issue, what you want to do is you want to see, okay, so this guy is down in CS. We check his stats, right? You check the math behind what you're saying. Then you watch the replay, right? Once you have these two sources, you have a number somewhere that says there is a deficit here, and you have a replay observing him gaining that deficit or creating that deficit for him, right? You can then correlate the two and say, what am I seeing in this replay or this live spectate that creates this deficit that I see in the numbers, right? We always want to work in patterns when we coach League of Legends, so it's very important that you can actually observe not just a pattern in his gameplay, but also a pattern in his stats. If you're coaching that guy how to play Fizz mid lane, and you observe a deficit in CS, like a dramatic deficit, and you begin teaching, you dedicate maybe 2 or 3 hours on how to CS effectively on melee range assassins. And then, after you've taught him all that and he sits there and he listens patiently, you go and check his stats and you realize that aside from that one game you watched, this guy actually CSs really, really well on Fizz. Well, now you made a mistake because you based your assumption on something that you hadn't observed as a pattern, but instead as a one-time occurrence. And what that means for you is you've actually begun working with this person in a suboptimal place. Typically, CSing isn't going to be suboptimal to teach because very few people can CS effectively. But as an example, my statement stands here, okay? So make sure that whenever you're doing analysis of some description, check the stats, check the facts, check the replay, and find out what am I seeing that causes this deficit consistently in all of his games or in most of his games. Okay. These 3 rules are another thing you can get tattooed. If you have the chain of learning on one eyelid, you can get the 3 rules tattooed on the other eyelid. These are not from some book or something. These are rules that I created, or at least I made myself. And these are because of the thing that, like, something that we've been seeing recently, which is opinionated coaching. Opinionated coaching is well and good to an extent, but it has severe limitations, not necessarily in terms of what can you teach as an opinionated coach, but more in terms of like what is your full reach potential as a coach. If you have a tendency to teach what you feel instead of what you know, you'll find yourself quickly struggling to teach people who feel differently from you. You'll also find yourself in a situation where when you when you end up being wrong in what you feel, it's gonna be hard to have people actually improve under your care, simply because of the fact that what you're doing isn't necessarily correct. So, in order to stray away from being this opinionated coach, this is also why I emphasize that we have to bring this math into the equation, because that's a fact, right? That's something that cannot be opinionated. It's not what you feel or think; it's what the world feels or thinks, right? The first rule that you will now live by is you will not teach something that you have not confirmed as a pattern. As I mentioned before, Fizz gets out CS'd in a game. That's not a pattern. If you see it over multiple games, that is a pattern. Obviously, you will have limited time in the beginning of coaching a person. So you'll begin working on the most basic of patterns. For example, if you see him having, poor map control, right? Poor dragon control and poor CSing. Well, CSing is more basic. So you'll work on that first, because you might not have observed the pattern fully, but you can see in his stats from his log coaching profile or his op.gg profile that it's something that's at least semi-consistent, right? You cannot entirely figure out why he gets this deficit, but at least it's something that's so basic that, if we build a good foundation, it can't really go that wrong. And the more you then coach and work with this guy, the more you can begin working on his individuals, right? But do not teach something you haven't observed as a pattern if it can at all be avoided, okay? Stray away from that stuff, because you'll end up with a guy who learns what I call the tips and tricks kind of portion of the game. So you'll have a guy who really just knows, like, there's that ancient meme with, did you know that if you cast Annie's E, the shield thingy, while Annie's Q is flying on 3 stacks of her passive, it will stun when it hits. And that's a great tip. But it is just that. It's a tip and trick. And tips and tricks will not hold you back to a high degree. That'll hold you back maybe 1 tier or 2 tiers. What holds you back from becoming consistently better is the patterns. Whenever we play League of Legends, we learn both good patterns and bad patterns. And it's these bad patterns that were holding us back. It's not the single individual mistakes that you'll have once in a while. I hope that's completely understandable to you guys. Similarly, you will not teach your opinions. I don't care if you hate Master Yi and you feel like he's a dumb fucking champion for noobs. If Master Yi is statistically good, or if the person you're coaching likes Master Yi, it's not your job. It's not your description to tell that person Master Yi is not good in the current meta. It is your job if you can prove that Master Yi isn't good. Not if you think or feel he is, but if you can somehow take out of the game, Master Yi is not good. He has a 42% win rate, which is like the bottom 5%. It's not bad, but and he's like consistently losing no matter how many games you play on him. He's just a bad champion, and he's underscaled, and his scalings are bad as well, right? If you can say that, perfect. It's not necessarily your job to tell the student do not play Master Yi, but it's a very good idea to inform your students of the restrictions you might be facing if this were the case with Master Yi. It's not your case. It's not your job to tell a person or to dictate how the game should be in an ideal world according to your image of the game. You can influence to a certain degree the playstyle, and you will as a coach. But you cannot just mindlessly dictate changes that you have not observed as fact. because then you'll have people who aren't necessarily playing the ideal, which is what we strive for as coaches, but you'll have people who are running around playing essentially what you like, right? And it's just not effective. The third is you will not teach bad habits, right? I want to use the same example as before. I think everybody's seen this, like, a Fizz mid lane, especially back when he was popular, who roams a lot, gets 11 kills, and has like 80 CS at 30 minutes, right? This is the standard. Typically, these assassins that roam a lot and ends up with kills and snowball, or no kills and no farm, and then completely bombs, right? Well, consistently foregoing CS for kills is not necessarily a good thing. If you have a guy who has this kind of playstyle, for example, and he consistently has low CS, it doesn't make sense to just say it doesn't make sense to just say, well, he is getting kills most of the time, so why don't we just try to optimize on this roaming strategy he has instead of teaching him how to farm effectively, right? That's teaching him a bad habit. That's telling him, sure, you have this thing that works sometimes, but you have to be able to work with him in the case that it doesn't work, right? You have to be able to optimize him for when it doesn't. So don't allow a student to have a bad habit just because it doesn't always punish him, right? It's like having a player who consistently has awful pathing and he gets caught out maybe once in every third game. Well, if you don't crack down on that pathing, then once in every third game, he'll get caught. That is a lot of games in which he will be caught. And I can guarantee you the 4 of the people in that one game out of 3 will be awfully angry. So say he plays 6 games a day, that's like over 20 people who are mad at you now. Did you see the point, Ryan? So, do not teach something that you haven't confirmed as a pattern. Do not teach your opinions, and do not teach bad habits. Anybody here like the Powerpuff Girls?
The power of what again?
Powerpuff Girls. That's like my favorite thing when I was like 10. It's these little girls with no fingers, and they beat up a monkey, I think.
Samurai Jack.
Yeah. This is like the Powerpuff Girls of actual people. Yeah, that Mojo Jojo guy. So we're getting up on what actually constitutes a good person, and relating it back to the play-by-play that I talked about earlier. When you're learning something, or when you're trying to teach something, you have to be able to appeal to all the different sides of a person that goes into understanding and working with an issue, okay? You have to be able to appeal to a person's brain, a person's heart, and a person's body, okay? When you are doing the play-by-play coaching, it's really, really great and everything, but you will only ever you will only ever appeal to the brain, okay, in the play-by-play. If you constantly only tell a person what he's doing wrong or show him what he's doing wrong, you are teaching his brain to notice this pattern, but you're not teaching his body, and you're not even teaching him why he should care about it, right? In order to improve on something consistently and effectively, you have to be able to cover all these 3 bases. And this is because, well, if there is no if there's no practical portion behind the brain segment, it'll still take quite a while for the human body to figure out how to execute on the different things, right? And it'll still figure out, well, where are the subliminal cues that I need to look for in order to trigger this thing that I saw in the brain, right? You have to be able to do it practically. This is the exercise, you learn quicker hearing something than you do by doing something. However, the doing something is necessary, which is why we have allotted so much to the practical, the practice, right? The repetition. That's the body. The repetition is to teach you muscle memory and teach your body to remember, right? You have to dedicate a good portion to appeal to the body. Studies also show us that if you cannot cover a person's heart, if you cannot engage a person in what you're saying, if you cannot give the person a reason he should care about it, he will not care about it. Even if a person comes to you and say, I really just want to get better at League of Legends, and you teach him something that he might need to know, but it's not something that's close to him, you'll find him spacing out more frequently. You'll find him maybe not doing exactly what you told him to do when you're working with him. Maybe he skims the corners, so it doesn't work as hard as he could have. We just don't work as hard as we could have when we care about things. People work harder when they get children, for example, just because they have to be able to financially pay for these children. People also are willing to like pursue hobbies further when they're in love because they care about like suddenly presenting themselves in a good light. If you can motivate a person and make them understand why it's important that they care about this and are engaged in this topic, then you have the heart covered. Then you have the feelings and engagement of the person, right? A good way to say this is a dictatorship can have good military, a democracy can have great military. In a dictatorship, you're not guaranteed to be fighting for this like what you love. You're just made to fight, right? And that means you'll never get the 100%. If you can have people who are doing this voluntarily, it's harder to find these people, but once they're there, they're gonna be better because they care, right? They really care. This model is really, really big to understand. It's very important that you understand you cannot just appeal to the brain. Appealing to the brain is being an analyst, and being an analyst, as I mentioned earlier, isn't a bad thing. If you want to do analysis, more power to you. We'll need good analysts in this scene. But if you only appeal to the brain and you call yourself a coach, what you're gonna find is you can show this guy 100 replays of what he's doing wrong. He will not fix it in one of them until you design an exercise that teaches him how to appeal to the body. Like that teaches him, how do I remember this with my muscles, right? How will I remember this? How will I hardwire it? And even then, it'll take a ton of rolling eyes, like eye rolls and size and all that, if he doesn't care about it, right? So you can teach him, oh, you should definitely be playing as defensive mid laners. But if he just only likes assassins and he cannot see the relevance in playing defensive mid laners, it's gonna take a lot longer, right? It's very important to also understand that if you cannot motivate a person's heart, like if you cannot appeal to a person's emotions on a topic, it's not necessarily because A, you're wrong, or because B, he doesn't like you or doesn't respect you. It's simply because of the fact that people have a hard time coming to like something. And it's a difficult thing, a dangerous thing to stray away from what you're comfortable on. So if you've only ever played Assassins mid lane because you really like them, and some guy's telling you, oh yeah man, you should play Orianna, she's so cool and hilarious, and you're like, well, she's not an assassin, so she's not what I'm used to. And it's scary to step out of your comfort zone. So appealing to the heart is one of the things that also makes a necessity out of having repeat sessions as a coach. I hope you guys can understand the value of having repeat sessions, right? Like, you can have one guy once, but if you cannot have him come back, you cannot follow up on what you've taught him, and it doesn't just happen overnight, this whole thing with gaining a trust from a person, which is essential to gaining this heart, right? To motivating and appealing to a person's heart. If you were to draw, like this isn't actually correct, but if you were to draw like a line of how much a person learns in the span of a year picking up a coach for the first time, it would look something like this. You see? It's like it starts slowly at first, but then the more and more and more a person, like a coach, learns how to work with the player, and the more and more a coach or the player becomes used to the coach and opens up to the coach, the more he picks up and the more he learns. Then you'll hit your first bumps where it begins dropping again, right? And then pick up again because you figure out a solution, and then a drop again. But this curve here, this is super important, and this is why we are required to have these repeat sessions. Patience, right? Anybody recognize this from your own lives? Like, you had maybe a teacher and you had a subject you were really, really interested in, but this teacher was just so boring and you just couldn't figure out, I sure did. I was a shit student in school. I would come in, I would sit down, I'd drop my bag, I'd open my computer and I'd play League of Legends in class because I didn't care. No, seriously. I still got A grades because I'm like naturally gifted or something in most of my classes. But I failed 2 classes, and they're holding me back right now from getting into the college I really want. I can still get into college because I'm lucky, but they're holding me back significantly because these teachers didn't appeal to my heart, and I never had the fortitude and the mental strength to take it for myself. I couldn't just fight through it because I was lazy, essentially. This is something I am working on as well. So, if you cannot figure, yeah, exactly. For many, it's math. For many boys, especially. Like for guys, no. This is global. It is more or less not based on even your upbringing. It's like your upbringing has a lot to do with it, but it's not the alpha and omega. You see people from the best off, most well off, and most structured family in the world who still struggles with certain topics. And this is like an epidemic at this point. So, yeah, for the love of God, teach your kids, if you have any, good habits. And teach yourself good habits, and make sure that you put emphasis on making these good habits, and don't allow repeat offenders, right? So yeah, if you can do this, we'll have good players in no time. As you'll see the little blotch in the middle, that's a good player. That's what we're aiming for. So we know that a player must, like, a big part of why people come for a coach is, like, if you ask a person who approaches you for coaching, why are you looking for a coach, they will nearly always tell you one thing and one thing only, and that is, I need somebody to tell me what I'm doing wrong. You'll notice this because nobody ever, or I say nobody ever, but very, very few people ever says, I need somebody to tell me how to do this better. There's a big difference there. The reason for this is that people typically associate what they're doing, like the ability to notice that they're doing something wrong, with some sort of ingrained humility. So saying, how can I improve sounds more cocky than saying, I know I'm bad already, please help me, right? It's not your job as a coach to continuously and only harp on players and say, you did this wrong, and also this wrong, and also this wrong, and also that wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, and this wrong, right? Also, one of the flaws in the play-by-play, you end up with severely demoralized students if they're not 100% dedicated to you, right? If your students don't like you, even if they're like instilled on the fact that they're coming to you and you will point out flaws in their gameplay, a player typically in-game notices about 1/10 of the issues that a coach will see, even a beginner coach will see, 10 times as much as the person sees themselves in the game, because of different issues like stress and pressure and stuff like this, right? And also the ability to hop between all different viewpoints and such, but that's irrelevant. That also means that if you just sit down and you just lay all of their issues out, one after the other, they'll become demoralized extremely quickly. And you probably recognize this from your own life, right? So you go to somebody and you say, can you just help me here? And they lay out like 100 different issues that you have to fix. And you're like, shit, I think I'll give up now. And this is why I'm really careful with presenting this topic. There's like a huge disclaimer here at the beginning. But it is important that we can find deficits, okay? I stressed earlier the importance of being able to prove something mathematically. I've broken an issue or a flaw in a person's gameplay into 3 different categories. I call them the information deficit, the resource deficit, and the mechanical deficit, okay? The reason I've broken it into these 3 categories is because if you can successfully categorize a person's overall gameplay flaw, it's a lot easier to make a long-lasting and overreaching plan, okay? If you can tell a person, look, you're really, really clever, you're really, really smart in terms of game knowledge, but you're consistently starved of resources, or you're consistently getting outplayed mechanically, that lays a solid foundation for you and the student, and you don't have to sit down and explain all 800 of his problems, because now he knows the general direction in which you will be working. It also helps you set up which kind of exercise you're looking for, right? if a person is consistently lacking in the information department, if he's starving himself of knowledge or doesn't know something, you know that you might be looking at more breakdowns. You might be looking at a little bit more of a lecture style teaching, because this guy already has the mechanics hardwired in him. He just needs to be told what to do different. Incidentally, these deficits can often lead to each other, which makes it relevant to watch several games and figure out what comes first, right? Does he lack resources because he's shit mechanically? Does he lack information because he's getting stressed, because he cannot concentrate on his mechanics, etc., etc., etc.? An information deficit is when a player lacks knowledge of a certain topic. If a person doesn't go for dragon because he doesn't know when his champion has a power spike that will allow him to secure dragon, that's an information deficit, right? If a person doesn't has an opportunity to win a 1v1 but doesn't go for it because he doesn't know, he doesn't know exactly how much damage does this, say, Rise deal to me, right? That's also an information deficit. It's not, for example, not being able to see something on somebody on the map. That would be a resource deficit, because you know that you can take this dragon, you just don't know if it's safe. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. So typically, if you ask a person, why did you not do this, for example, and they say, because I could not see or because I did not have, right? That's a resource deficit. If they say, because I did not know or because I wasn't sure, that's an information deficit. So if they don't know if they can win the 1v1, if they don't know what the spikes are, etc., you want to be working in the information department with people. They typically have an information deficit. A resource deficit is often the result of an information deficit, but not always. This is when, so you say, it's level 11, my guy is playing Vayne and he's up against the Caitlyn. He should be able to 1v1 right now. And you go in and you say, oh, he lost the 1v1. What happened? He didn't even get outplayed. He did all the right things, or most of the right things, enough to at least win this 1v1, but he still lost. And you go in and you look, bollocks. He didn't actually, he's so starved in gold, or the Caitlyn had 3 dragons and a red buff, something like this, right? It's the inability to execute on something that should be possible based on the fact that the resources just aren't coming in. One of the one of the reasons we nearly always end up working with how to CS effectively first is because if you can CS effectively, you have a consistently high baseline of resources to work from, right? You have a consistent ground level to build on. You have a good foundation to sow some roots in. And this is really important because you can teach a person, Vayne spikes at level 11, and he can always 1v1 Caitlyn at level 11. But can he? Can he really always, can she really always 1v1 that Caitlyn at level 11? What if she died 4 times in lane? What if she didn't get any CS? What if, etc., etc., etc.? Starvation makes inconsistency happen, right? If you're used to winning matchups 9 times out of 10, the one matchup where you're not winning, you will be shite out of luck because you don't know how to play it out, because you haven't ever been taught how do I work effectively when my resources in X situation and X situation. So I could have essentially put this into the same category, the information deficit, the resource deficit, but I broke it up into 2 different ones because while one can cause the other, the solution to one of them is not the solution to the other. The solution to fixing a consistent resource deficit, say he doesn't have enough gold, is not to show him, to tell him consistently, you don't have enough gold. It's, again, to put him, say, into a custom game and work with it mechanically in the body, right? So the solution isn't the same. That's why I broke it up. The mechanical deficit is, so the guy has CS'd effectively. He also knows that he can win this 1v1 and you agree with him. And he goes in and he gets outplayed. Bam, that's a mechanical deficit. It's the inability to execute on something in terms of pure mechanics. Mechanical deficits are kind of gross to work with, simply because they're typically, first of all, the funniest to work with from a student standpoint, because the ability to work on mechanics entails a lot of funny exercises and playing the champion you like, right? You're playing set, you fail to execute a combo, so coach says, yay, let's go do the combo 10,000 times on set. Yay, that's funny, right? The issue here is that if you exclusively work in mechanical deficits, you'll have a guy who's really, really smart, but tilts incredibly hard because he doesn't know shit about the game, right? He knows his limits on that one champion in that one very, very limited case, but he's not really good at the game. He's just good at the champion. There's a huge distinction to make there. We tend to notice as people mechanical deficits a lot quicker than we notice information deficits, and especially quicker than we notice resource deficits, because most people pride themselves a lot more on their mechanics. You will nearly never find a student who prides himself on his information. And if you do, it's not necessarily like, you've never seen a highlight reel of a guy who's just really smart at League of Legends. You see highlight reels of Vayne doing flashy plays or Seth doing flashy plays, right? Yeah, you're laughing, but it's true, right? Nobody ever says, hell yeah, I'm good at Soraka. It just doesn't work like that. So we tend to notice mechanical deficits a lot earlier because the mechanics of League of Legends is kind of like our fingerprint. The differences in how you play the game compared to other people is in the mechanics typically. It's where you get to brag. It's the showy offy bit of your gameplay. And that's why it's basically what we judge other people on. Even the professional League of Legends players use mechanics as a baseline. People will cite things like, okay, so this guy is really good at the game, but his mechanics are weak. Like that's an excuse in pro play. Even if he's playing something mechanically low, like low tier, like Sivir. Sivir doesn't require a lot of mechanics. And people will still say, this guy lost the game because he has weak mechanics. Because that's just what we're used to picking up on. Because it's human nature to stroke your own egos first, right? I hope this makes sense to everybody. Mechanics are the easy way out. If you only ever teach mechanics, look in and think, am I actually working on the right issues right here? Question? Yeah, well, exactly. If you have somebody who prides himself on warding, he is a support. There are no other reasons. If there is another reason, it's just somebody who's been told that there was another reason. Nobody ever comes to that conclusion themselves, funnily enough. And one of you guys is sitting out there, we're like, well, I came to the conclusion on my own. And, great for you, but most people don't. So I hope this makes sense, right? These different deficits, it's not just about figuring out, a person is lacking, he couldn't do the 1v1, and then show him, see, you lost this 1v1. The person already knows that. What makes a really good analyst / coach is being able to say, you lost this 1v1 because of you didn't have this or do this, right? That's what makes it good. That goes from skimming the layer from what the person can see himself to actually delving into the gameplay.